Batman's coming.
Batman Begins the game was released on June 14th, 2005, a day before the release of Batman Begins, a film directed by Christopher Nolan. The game was developed by Eurocom and published by EA in conjunction with Warner Bros. Around this time in the early 2000s, we would see a variety of video games hot off the licenses of movie franchises, such as The Incredibles, Fantastic Four, and of course Batman, just to name a few. These games usually range from mediocre to horrendously bad, often designing levels by filling in gaps around the story of the movie. But if you're anything like me, I grew up with these types of games. And only getting games around holidays meant asking for the good stuff, like say GTA San Andreas. But when mom doesn't approve of violent video games, you end up with something like Batman Begins. Regardless, I was just happy to get a video game, and because I spent so much time with these types of games as a kid, I have a huge fondness for them today. So today, I thought I'd take a deep dive at the first title on my checklist, Batman Begins, the video game. Let's get started! Batman Begins follows the storyline of the film pretty closely, telling the origin story of Bruce Wayne and how he came to be Batman, while also introducing the film's many antagonists, such as Carmine Falcone, Scarecrow, and Ra's al Ghul. The game helps you out with this, usually by giving you 20 seconds of low-quality film scenes in the hopes of giving direction to each level before it begins.
As a man, I'm flesh and blood. I can be ignored, I can be destroyed, but as a symbol I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting.
What symbol?
As much as I like to hear Christian Bale talk to himself, it doesn't exactly make it easy to follow the story, and keeps the reason for each level pretty vague if you haven't seen the movie. But who needs story when you've got gameplay? The game follows linear level design, often leading from platforming segment, to sneak encounter, to combat encounter, while throwing a couple mini games in between, such as hacking a device or lockpicking doors, which can be pretty tedious and boring. If you are a big fan of the movie though, the game may interest you, as it goes deeper into how Batman got to certain scenes in the film. For instance, the scene where Falcone's car gets lifted by a huge crane. You start from the pier, go to the sewers, back up to the docks, onto a cargo boat, and finally to the end of the docks, and starting the crane. And of course you get to hear the classic line,
Ah! What? What the hell are you? I'm Batman.
This game does something different with its gameplay, featuring a fear mechanic, which is used as both a linear and optional device. And what I mean by that is sometimes before a big fight, there will be some sort of environmental hazard like blowing up barrels with a batarang or dropping huge crates on top of enemies, usually in the hopes of making them shit their pants.
Look out! How did that happen?
This will make enemies drop their weapons, surprisingly, leaving them open for an attack. I don't know about you, but the last thing I would be dropping if my life was in danger would be my damn sidearm. Scarecrow must not be paying much, because these might be the worst henchmen I've ever seen.
I'll tell Gordon everything! I'm wearing ladies' underwears.
But you also have the optional choice of using gadgets, which you can find around crates in the world, usually on the linear path of the level. These gadgets consist of smoke grenades, flash grenades, and a high-frequency transponder, which summons bats to swarm around the enemies. So yeah, the shitting your pants analogy. If you put enough fear in the enemies, you can even perform a finishing move, where the enemy sees you as a more demonic version of Batman, which is the way he looked in the film when seen through Scarecrow's fear gas. I guess we can assume that Scarecrow's lackeys are usually huffing on fear gas in their downtime. There's also multiple stealth sections with takedowns. With only a couple takedown animations, however, it kinda gets old after a while, and there is usually never any challenge to these encounters. The enemy most of the time will just be right in front of you, mindlessly looking the other way. Every now and then you'll come across an enemy that can be interrogated for information, which really just means Batman gets to punch a guy until he says something he wants to hear, whether it means useful information or not.
What else?
Crane knows you're here. He's called the cops.
What else?
Speaking of punching, that's all the combat really consists of in this game. The combat system does actually give you variability with a block counter and even an aerial combat move, but you really can just get by pressing square until you beat the enemy. You can occasionally press circle for a special finishing move or roundhouse kick when the game prompts you to, but after playing around 7 or so hours of this, the combat just doesn't have anything to keep you going. It felt clunky and uninspired, and it kept it very simple, but I do appreciate the option to change it up a bit, even if there's not much there to begin with. What did get me through the experience, though, was the atmosphere. Art design. What kept me going through the experience was the occasional backdrops and atmosphere that carried through the game. Whether it was the snowy cliffs surrounding the League of Shadows, Gotham City's skyline, or even Arkham Asylum. For a PS2 game, it showed a lot of character, and what it doesn't make up for in gameplay, it definitely makes up for in sound design, voice acting, and art direction. The game sounds great, taking from the score of the film. The voice acting doesn't always hit the mark, but both voice acting and animation are fairly good for the time it came out. Not to mention they used most of the voice actors from the movie.
Siles! Get away from her.
Batman, they say you're not mortal. They say you can't die. How much you want to bet I can make you wish you could?
It keeps that yellow and dark aesthetic throughout the game as it did in the movie, and I think that definitely gives it that extra appeal. Sometimes I would find myself taking in an area's location and backdrop and just looking around. I don't think the areas of the game were as fully realized as they could have been, but considering they were probably on a time limit with creating this game, they made some good atmosphere, and it definitely stuck with me since I was a kid. The game provides a decent amount of locations and tries to change it up pretty often so it doesn't feel stale. It even takes you to Wayne Manor, as Ra's al Ghul attempts to burn it down. And what's better than video game Christian Bale?
Crane was working for you. He'll destroy thousands of lives.
Millions of lives.
Lucius, what are you still
I
doing
was
here?
nearly killed by some maniac in black pajamas.
You have to get out of here. We need to manufacture your neurotoxin antidote on a large scale. Alfred, are you still alive?
Shit! Bat Tank! Now for the real reason to play the game. The tank missions. These 2 story missions have you barreling down Gotham streets in your badass bat tank, running over everybody. This basically turns into a Burnout game, having you smashing into other vehicles, watching them be demolished in slow motion, and continuing on your path. This is honestly the most fun I had with the game, and genuinely enjoyed playing these sections as they felt and played great. The missions are basically getting from point A to point B, swerving around and running into enemies that are chasing you. The premise is simple, but executed so well that I just didn't want those missions to end. You could drive into anybody, including cops and even regular drivers. But that's okay, as long as the Bat computer lets you know no one died.
1181, minor injury, our car is wrecked.
Honestly, if they just made a game around the Bat Tank missions, I think it could have been something great, but it was pretty similar to other racing games around the time. The resemblance to Burnout was uncanny. If there's anything I'll take from this game, it would be these missions. Just a great, fast-paced, good time. After you beat the game, they even let you replay these levels as time trials in the extras menu, and I think they're definitely worth playing.
Final thoughts.
Unfortunately, the end of the game doesn't offer much to the player other than just replaying the Bat Tank missions and throwing in a couple extra costumes, which are pretty underwhelming, as well as a section where you can watch trailers and interviews from the film. You also unlock something called the Gallery of Fear, where you walk around as Batman in a couple rooms of Arkham Asylum and view bios of important characters of the film. It's not much, but it's something interesting for beating the game. Although the game didn't live up to the movie, it offered a decent enough experience for anyone interested in the film. The game does have its faults though, such as lackluster combat and major dips in the frame rate during active scenes, which can be a pain. But I give props to the developers for trying to design levels sometimes around nothing and keeping a solid enough design, as well as that dark Gotham aesthetic that flows throughout the entirety of the game. And who knows, maybe the game offered a bit of inspiration to the true powerhouse Batman game, Batman Arkham Asylum, which was created by developer Rocksteady Studios and released 4 years later. There's no denying Christopher Nolan's grittier cinematic take on Batman had an influence on Batman media going forward. Overall, Batman Begins had a lot of ideas, but doesn't implement its mechanics to its fullest potential. I can only imagine the difficult creative process when you have decent ideas, but you have to play by the strict rules of the movie. Playing the game again 9 years later gave me a better understanding of what the team may have been going for when creating the game. And seeing the different locations, skyboxes, and art made me appreciate it even more. So if you ever get your hands on a copy, or are just a fan of the Christopher Nolan films, I'd definitely give this one a try. Okay, bye. Bat tank, baby! Ah! Fuck. Hate myself.